Black news is American news. Yes, Black people as an underrepresented group need more stories told about what they're experiencing. It is also true that the Black experience is the American experience too. And capital B exists to fill that gap and tell those stories with a perspective that is informed by place, informed by people's experiences, not just the people reporting on, but also our journalists, to ensure that these stories are part of the record of how we're understanding American life today.
Welcome to WriteLane. This podcast features Tampa Bay Times Enterprise reporter Lane DeGregory, and my name is Maria Carrillo. I'm a former Enterprise editor for the Times, which helped us kick off this podcast in 2017. Now, it's being presented by the Poynter Institute and sponsored by the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University. And the episodes this year will focus on some of the winners of the 2025 Poynter Journalism Prizes. As always, Lane and I want to go deeper on the subject of craft. So these episodes are geared toward exploring the reporting, the writing, and the editing behind this award-winning work. These podcasts will be available everywhere you listen to podcasts and on the Poynter Institute's YouTube channel. Joining us today is Akoto Ofori-Atta, one of the co-founders of Capital B. Capital B won this year's Robert G. Magruder Diversity Award, given to media professionals who encourage diversity in hiring and coverage. So today's topic, Capital B.
This program is supported by the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University. The Cronkite School offers undergraduate and graduate degrees and other professional development opportunities for writers and storytellers. For more information, visit cronkite.asu.edu.
Hi, Akoto. Thank you so much for joining us. We're happy.
Thank you for having me.
Can we start by talking about the origin of Capital B? How you guys managed to create an independent nonprofit newsroom and staff it with wonderfully talented journalists?
Yeah, sure. So in 2020, it was June 2020. I think that's like at this point shorthand for all the crazy things that were happening in the world, right? COVID, George Floyd and Breonna Taylor protests, a very contentious election season. And, around that time, a lot of Black journalists were being very vocal about the role of journalism and the ways in which some failures of journalism have, helped to propel the moment that we found ourselves in. They were also talking a lot about how they had been not trusted to tell Black stories in their news organizations, that they had been sidelined in many cases, and they had just felt like bringing their experience as a Black journalist was not always appreciated in the newsrooms they were in. At the same time, my co-founder, Lauren Williams, who was the senior vice president and editor-in-chief of Vox.com at the time, and I was managing editor at The Trace, which is a nonprofit newsroom covering gun violence in America. We were leading newsrooms, and we also felt very stressed about media's ability to meet the moment we were in for Black audiences and for Black people. Lauren and I had known each other since 2009, 2010, where we met as junior editors at theroot.com, which is a Black digital publication. And we thought, is now the time to, branch out and do a thing that we had, as junior editors, always sort of dreamed about, right? Which is like, what would we do if we were running things? If we could have the kind of newsroom that we needed as young journalists, if we could do the kinds of stories we wanted to do for the communities we care about, what would we do? And, once we spoke it out and had a Zoom, her and I had remained friends. We hadn't had a Zoom call in at that point in 10 years. So we hadn't worked together in 10 years. So we had a Zoom. Once we put it in the air and then told some folks about it, we really couldn't bring it back in. The timing was right. The gap was so very clear. And then we announced our intention to launch Capital B in November 2020.
Talk a little bit about the name. I love the name on so many levels. Talk
Oh
about the
man,
origin story of that.
I'm so upset that I can't find our original list of names because they were really bad. We really struggled. And so one of the things that was happening in that reckoning that I was talking about, right, is that there are a lot of, I would say, like cosmetic changes that media and other institutions, including like the government, were making in the moment, right? And one of them in media was that as part of, the style book that many journalists use, AP style book, that we would now be capitalizing Black. And, again, I think that is a fine and important thing to do. I also feel like there were other important things to do that I didn't want that good development to sort of stand and is like, we've solved everything, right? So despite being sort of skeptical of the intentions, I do think it did represent what we were trying to do, was sort of to really center Black experiences, Black stories, and to underscore the importance of Black experiences in America. And as that was happening, my co-founder was like, what if we just called it Capital B? And we were like, there it is. It just made a lot of sense for what we were trying to do. And yeah, we're really happy with the name too.
I'm curious about when you come up in traditional newsrooms, and this has happened often to me, minority journalists are very much in the minority, and then even women sometimes are in the minority or they don't have the power position. So like in your newsroom, how different was it to suddenly be, okay, these are all your choices. You get to decide.
Yeah, I mean, it's the freedom we needed, right? Again, so much of this was in response to our own experiences, but also to like the experiences of our peers who, were told like, don't bring your outlook or your own personal experiences to the work, right? Not being believed that a story was a story, or that this particular development in this community is very important. And what we hear from our staff is that being free of that, right? Like people don't pitch stories at Capital B and we question, whether or not this very obvious story about Black life in a particular place is like worthy of publication, right? It's just not,
Right.
there's a hurdle that you do not have to cross when you're doing stories at Capital B. And like that is the exact freedom we needed. And it's the exact it's the way that we fulfill our mission, just like deeply understanding instinctively what an important story is for these particular audiences. And the other thing I'll say is that because we are doing work for communities that are typically underrepresented, it is a very different thing when you're thinking about your audience that way, right? Like, we have readers and supporters from all over the country who, believe in our work and get value for our work. We are also writing for particular communities. And that lens is just, I think, very different than, when you are doing this kind of work with a broader sort of audiences in mind.
Yeah. So you had the freedom to you don't have to question the ideas. You're just focused on the execution. How are we going to tell the best?
Yes. I mean, it is a newsroom, so of course we're sharpening ideas as we go.
Right. Sure.
It's always be sharpening, but there is like this sort of, there are questions that we at Capital B are just not going to ask, that I think a lot of our reporters and editors have had to like make a case in a different way for some of the stories that they've wanted to do.
How did you decide which topics you were going to prioritize? Health is one of them, right? I mean, health.
Yes. So there's health, education, politics, of course, criminal justice. We did a lot of community listening, and we also just like did our own surveys of the landscape and like what were the stories that felt very urgent for Black people to be for us to be covering for Black communities. Education, of course, a huge one. And then another one came to us just before launch, because there was so much, again, contentious election season, a lot of people digging into what rural voters think about the election and where they're going. And one of the things that really came to us is that, like, we know that rural is often coded as white in media. And we know that's not true, that the Black rural South exists, that it is vast, and they have very different experiences, needs, challenges, joys than people who live in the white rural South. And so we came up with a rural issues beat for our national newsroom, and very, very, very exciting and fulfilling to see the ways that beat is taken off. Many of our most read stories are on that beat. When we do stories in the rural South, as a national publication, from our national publication, quite often the thing that happens is that the town or the city that the story is about is where most of the traffic is coming from, or a significant portion of the traffic is coming from. And so, those are all very strong signals to us that we filled a really big gap, right? And the kinds of stories we do there are just stories that, like, we just don't see anywhere else.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with our conversation with Akoto.
As a journalist, what keeps you up at night? At Poynter, we understand the pressures from shrinking resources to shifting audiences to tough ethical calls. Our expert trainers and coaches bring decades of experience to help you meet those challenges. We don't offer generic approaches. Poynter delivers strategies tailored to your needs, including training managers to lead high-performing teams, demystifying AI, and offering personal coaching to help move change forward or navigate a crisis. We work with news organizations large and small, local and national, commercial and nonprofit, as well as content creators and communicators in marketing and public relations. Let us help create the solution you need. Go to poynter.org/consulting-and-coaching today.
One of the things that was really interesting to me about your website is that you talked about part of your mission was to affect change and bring about solutions. I didn't see any like overt editorials, like finger waggy, here's what you should do, but there was a lot of resources, there were a lot of ideas, there were a lot of possibilities. Talk a little bit about that, like why that became part of your mission and how you guys are going about doing that.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is like, I think what you're getting at when you talk about editorials is like, we don't do opinion writing, we don't do commentary. And there was just that was like a sort of market decision, right? We looked at the landscape and saw that there was a lot of great opinion journalism done by Black journalists about Black communities. Lots of commentary, and what the big gap that we saw was like a well-funded newsroom that does original reporting. And that original reporting really, stories that really have a sense of place, stories that are uncovering things that you will not find in mainstream media, stories that are examining the people who are navigating problems and finding solutions in really interesting ways. That is really how we think about the original reporting that we do, right? Stories that also illuminate injustice in different places and in different areas, illuminate injustices in ways that you wouldn't think wouldn't necessarily think of, right? And so having that element of like surfacing things that people don't know, the element of surprise, is really an important part of how we construct our stories. And we do a lot of audience listening, a lot of audience surveying, and the folks who read us and the folks who eventually become Capital readers are always talking about wanting to know what is possible to address the issues that we're facing, right? Like wanting to deeply understand, why systemic issues still exist, who's doing things about them, how are they getting worse, how are they getting better, and it's not just sort of like pie in the sky, right? It's really about truth telling, right? And being honest about the landscape and where things are, and what are the mechanisms through which we can combat some of the really serious things that are happening in our communities. And so that's really the thrust of how we think about our pitching, our story ideation, and our promotion of those stories too.
It's sort of a parallel you've got going on. You've got this empowerment of your staff and trying to empower your audience, right? That's what it feels
Yes.
like.
Yeah.
Well, it felt much better than reading an editorial, which sometimes feels like finger waggy or here's what you need to do. It felt much more like here's what people are talking about. Like here's possibilities, possible paths to solutions, right?
Yeah, and here's what we're bearing as journalists and reporters. Here's what we're bearing witness to. Here's the thing that is happening, and I want to share that with you. And one of the things that has come to us over the years, as we listen to our audience, is that capital B is really a window and a mirror, right? It is a mirror because so many people feel affirmed when they read, a thing that we've done that they maybe didn't knew what was happening, we didn't quite have language for, or like didn't know where else to find more information about it. One of my favorite examples of this is that our rural issues reporter, Aaliyah Wright, who's from Clarksdale, Mississippi Delta, wanted to do a piece on dollar stores and the proliferation of dollar stores in Black communities. And what she found is that it's actually, it's the food insecurity, it's a food insecurity issue, and it's also, a business deterrent, because so many dollar stores sort of keep larger, better quality businesses away, and that proliferation of dollar stores being like the main place where people can get the food and the groceries they need becomes a real challenge when it comes to food security. And the comments we got on that were, yes, oh my gosh, this is the thing that I always think about. Like my city has like $8 generals. Like, what is up with that? I knew there was something up, and to be able to like bring clarity to something that, we see and feel and understand, and be able to bring that, information that helps to connect the dots is something that's really important. So that affirmation is an important part of what we do. But we're also a window, right? Black communities across the country are not at all the same. And Black people also want to understand the struggles of other Black people across the country, right? When we do a piece on, the hottest neighborhood in the country statistically is in Phoenix, Arizona, and it's a Black neighborhood. And Black people across the country, Black communities across the country are interested in how Black people in Phoenix are going to survive and how they're surviving the climate and environment crisis, right? So that is, I think, a real value, being able to both affirm and give insight into the way that other Black people around the country are dealing with some of these issues.
Are there any special things you guys do to hear your audience? You're talking about listening to them. And I mean, I assume they respond to stories and they give your reporters ideas, but are there anything in particular that you're doing to reach out to them? I mean, you mentioned surveys when you started, right?
Yes. So there's a couple ways. So nationally, we do an annual audience survey, and that's part of what the national team does. But also the reporters really understand that their work has a real sense of place. And to do that, you got to get in there and you got to listen, you got to spend some time, right? You got to build those relationships, and our model sort of gives people that time in many ways. So that's on the national side, that's how we do that there. And then our local newsrooms, we haven't really talked about our national and local model, that we have a national newsroom and local newsrooms in Atlanta, Georgia, and Gary, Indiana. And the plan is to grow that network of local newsrooms across the country over time. Listening is baked into our model in those newsrooms. We have a community engagement editor whose job is to be the eyes and the ears and the feet of the community, and just understand what's happening, and then bringing that back to the newsroom, to the editors and the journalists there, to shape stories. But it doesn't just stop there. The editors and reporters also need to do that engagement, right? Showing up in places, not because you're going to write about the thing, but just because you're building relationships. As a part of that, we do community surveys annually. We also do a bunch of events where we ask people questions live. That in-person connection is very, very, very important. And that's quite often where we get our richest sort of qualitative data and information about how to serve these communities. And so listening is absolutely baked into our model.
I love that. Yeah, we're going to ask you next about the whole, you've got a national newsroom,
Yeah.
and I wondered if you guys, the intent was to grow out to other cities.
Yes.
So is there a difference in how you approach the local coverage versus the national coverage?
Yeah, I mean, so, the local newsrooms, their remit is for that local audience, right? So the kinds of things that they are reporting and uncovering is going to need to be relevant to that city. And nationally, we think about, it's really where a lot of our window and mirror approach plays out, but really thinking about all of the big developments in policy in our beats, and identifying a place that can tell that story, and then also being able to look out and explain like what this means for the country and for the future.
So 5 years into this project, you've been doing this. Talk a little bit about your audience, who you've reached, how big it is, and also what are you most proud of during this time?
Oh, yeah. So again, through listening, through reading a lot of the comments, through, quite frankly, some of the richest commentary we get about from our audiences from our donations page. And when they're leaving notes, they're leaving donations. And as we comb through all of that, what we began to understand about our audience is that they're real change seekers, right? Not change makers. That is a different thing. But people who have a sense that something is broken, something is not right, and are really looking for the spaces and the places where people are addressing those things that are broken. So it's going back to what I was saying before. So we call our audience change seekers. They're across the country in most of the big cities: New York, DC, Atlanta, Chicago, LA. They just care very much about Black futures, right? Black progress, have a sense of hope that things can be better, and want information that helps them understand how that future can come about. What am I most proud of? I mean, we are a newsroom of about 30 people who are doing work that stories that you just don't see in other places. I think that is the thing that, really, really touches me when we, get a donation. My co-founder was just talking about this in another video about, in a documentary about reimagining local news. But when people make a donation and they say like, I live in this place, or my aunt lives in this place, and I did not know this was happening. And I'm really tapped in, and I would not have known this was happening if I didn't see this story. The number of times that we hear that is, it's really remarkable. And it lets us know that we are doing the thing that we wanted to do, was fill a gap, like, and do the kind of work that, that people just, the story would not exist if we weren't around to tell it. And that is the thing that I'm most proud of, that we all get together every day to try to find that work and then put it out in the world.
Thank you so much. This has been a great conversation, and it's so inspiring to hear you talk about creating your own newsroom and doing all the things that you're doing.
Yeah.
Thank you to the listeners. If you're listening and you can donate, support nonprofit newsrooms and support other newsrooms. Support all newsrooms, people. It's important. Thanks again to Arizona State and Poynter. The 2026 Poynter Journalism Prizes open for entries on January 5th. Mark your calendars. Don't forget, you can find old episodes on poynter.org/WriteLane and wherever you get your podcasts. Please join our Facebook group if you'd like to be notified when new episodes appear. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. This podcast was produced by the amazing Dalia Colon. Technical support was provided by Sam Posnack, who does wonderful work here at Poynter. Music was composed and performed by Dan DeGregory.